Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Mango Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. The scene unfolded slowly, like a storm building on the horizon. I stood at the entrance of the elite restaurant, my eyes locked on the man seated with an attractive blonde at the far corner table. Mark, the man who had ruined my life, sat there unaware of what was about to happen. His carefree smile, that smug charm radiating off him as he laughed with his date, made my blood boil. I had known he would be here. This was his usual spot, a place for men like him, where charm and smooth words replaced loyalty and honesty. Camille wasn't here, but she might as well have been. Her betrayal clung to me, heavy and suffocating, as I approached the table. Every step I took felt deliberate, each one echoing the weight of my decision. The other patrons were wrapped up in their own lives, oblivious to the storm about to crash over their dinner. I reached the table, standing before Mark, who didn't notice me at first. Then, as if sensing the shift in the air, his eyes met mine. He froze, his smile faltering. "Mark, isn't it?" My voice cut through the ambient noise, too calm, too steady for what was churning beneath the surface. He blinked, glancing at the woman next to him before offering me a rehearsed grin. Yeah, do I know you?" I didn't answer immediately, letting the silence grow thick around us. The blonde shifted uncomfortably in her seat, sensing the tension, but Mark just sat there, trying to mask his discomfort with false confidence. He had no idea that I was here to strip away his illusions, to drag his dirty secret into the light for everyone to see. "No, but you know my wife." The words landed like a slap across the face, causing his grin to disappear completely. Mark's face stiffened, and his eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape. The laughter that had filled the restaurant seemed to quiet down, as if the entire place had shifted its attention to this small corner. The blonde beside him, her lips parting slightly in confusion, looked from me to him, realizing something was terribly wrong. "Your wife?" Mark finally muttered, leaning back in his chair. His carefree charm faltered, replaced by the barest hint of worry. He was trying to stay calm, but the nervous glance toward the restaurant's exit gave him away. It was clear he was searching for a way out. "Camilla," I said, enunciating her name slowly, savoring the way it seemed to sink into him like poison. "My wife. The one you spent the night with on our anniversary." His eyes widened just a bit, a flash of recognition crossing his face. He knew exactly who I was now. He knew this wasn't just a random confrontation. This was personal, and it was about to get ugly. The blonde looked between us, her confusion growing. "Mark?" she whispered, her voice uncertain, like she had stepped into a play midway through and couldn't figure out her role. So Mark cleared his throat, trying to collect himself. "Look, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Or you've got the wrong guy." I stepped closer, placing my hands on the back of the empty chair across from him. The sound of the chair scraping against the floor echoed through the now eerily quiet restaurant. The other diners had begun to take notice, eyes peeking over menace and wine glasses to witness what was unfolding. "Don't insult my intelligence," I said, keeping my voice low but hard. I leaned in slightly, my eyes boring into his. "That you were with her. You know it, I know it. There's no getting out of this." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his facade of confidence crumbling as the weight of the situation bore down on him. He could no longer play the charming stranger. Not here, not now. He was caught, and we both knew it. His eyes darted again to the blonde, who was staring at him now, disbelief slowly creeping into her expression. The pieces were falling into place for her too. "Mark?" she said again, more forcefully this time. "What is he talking about?" Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was cornered. There was no witty remark or smooth explanation that could get him out of this one. Not when I was standing right in front of him, laying his sins bare for the entire restaurant to see. I let the silence stretch on for a moment, watching him squirm, relishing his discomfort. He had taken something from me, something precious, and I wasn't going to let him slip away without facing the consequences. "You see," I continued, my voice soft but steady, "I could have handled it differently. I could have come to your house in the dead of night, could have made sure no one ever found you." My words were sharp, loaded with the kind of menace that made his eyes widen. "But that's not what I want. What I want is for you to admit it, right here, right now. I want everyone to hear it." The blonde shifted uncomfortably, pushing her chair back slightly as if preparing to leave. Mark, now visibly sweating, swallowed hard. His voice came out strained, barely above a whisper. "Look, man, it was a mistake, okay? I didn't know. A mistake." I interrupted, my voice rising just enough to draw more eyes from nearby tables. "Do you call sleeping with my wife on our anniversary a mistake?" Mark's face paled, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. He couldn't hide behind his charm now, not with the truth hanging between us, heavy and undeniable. He opened his mouth to say something, but I wasn't interested in hearing any more excuses. "And I don't care what you thought, or how you want to spin it," I said, straightening up and looking him dead in the eyes. "It's all for you to admit it, in front of everyone. Tell them who you are, what you did." The room had gone completely silent now, all eyes on Mark, waiting for him to respond. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He looked down at the table, avoiding my gaze, and then finally he spoke. I slept with her, he muttered, his voice barely audible. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Mark's admission echoed throughout the restaurant, rippling across the room as heads turned, eyes wide with shock. His voice had been low, almost a whisper, but the weight of those words carried farther than he could have ever imagined. There was no taking it back now, no charming his way out of this. He had said it, and everyone heard. The blonde sitting beside him froze, her face drained of color. She had been expecting a casual night out, maybe some flirtation, a little fun, but now she was thrust into a situation she hadn't signed up for, a revelation of betrayal that left her staring at the man she thought she knew with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "Mark, what the hell?" she stammered, pushing her chair back slightly, as if the very idea of being near him made her sick. He turned to her, eyes pleading, but he had no words left. Not for her, not for me, not for anyone. His mask had slipped, and beneath it was nothing but guilt and cowardice. I stood there for a moment, just watching him squirm. There was a certain satisfaction in seeing the man who had wrecked my life so thoroughly unravel before my eyes. His perfect little world was crumbling in front of everyone, and he had no idea how to stop it. But I wasn't done yet. I leaned in closer, my voice low but sharp. "That wasn't so hard, was it, Mark?" I said, my lips curling into a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Now let's make sure we're clear. Tell them her name." His eyes flicked up to me, a mixture of fear and anger flashing across his face. He opened his mouth to argue, push back, but he knew it was useless. He was too deep in now. There was no going back. He was mine to control, and everyone was watching. "Say it," I insisted, leaning even closer, my hands gripping the back of the chair, knuckles white. "Tell them her name. Tell them her name." He swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as he fought to speak. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape that wasn't there. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he muttered her name. "Camilla." It was like a knife in my chest. Hearing her name come from his lips after everything felt like being gutted, but I kept my face still, holding back the surge of pain and anger that threatened to break through. This wasn't about me. Not anymore. This was about making him pay. The blonde next to him recoiled as if she had been struck. "You slept with someone's wife," she hissed, standing up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "You unbelievable piece of—" "Wait," Mark stammered, reaching for her, but she slapped his hand away, her face twisted in disgust. "It's not like that. Don't touch me," she snapped, her voice loud enough to draw even more attention. "You're disgusting. I can't believe I fell for your bullshit." She grabbed her purse and stormed off, leaving Mark sitting there, his hand frozen mid-reach. He looked utterly defeated, like a man who had lost control of everything in his life in the span of a few minutes. His date gone, his secret exposed, his reputation shattered. And I wasn't finished. I straightened up, letting the silence settle around us. The other diners were watching now, openly staring. I could feel their eyes on me and Mark, waiting for the next bomb to drop, and I was more than happy to oblige. "You see, Mark," I said, my voice cold and steady, "you didn't just sleep with my wife. You ruined something that can never be fixed. On the day we were supposed to be celebrating us, you were with her. You didn't just betray me, you took everything I thought I knew about her and set it on fire." He looked up at me, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He had nothing left to say. What could he say? Apologies didn't mean anything now. Regret wouldn't undo what he had done. "If you live with that," I continued, my eyes narrowing. "But I hope you realize this isn't just about you. You've destroyed more than just your little fling. You've shattered lives." I could see the realization hit him then, the full weight of what he had done sinking in. He had been caught up in the moment, in the excitement of something new, never stopping to think about the lives he was tearing apart in the process. But now, in the harsh light of day, he couldn't escape it. The restaurant remained deathly quiet, everyone around us waiting for the final blow, and I delivered it without hesitation. "Enjoy your dinner, Mark, because it's the last peaceful moment you'll have for a long time." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him alone in the wreckage of his life. As I turned my back on Mark, I could feel the weight of all those eyes following me, tracking my every step as I walked away from the wreckage I had created. And my heart was still pounding in my chest, but it wasn't from fear or anxiety. It was adrenaline, a rush of vindication that swirled through me like a storm. I had torn down the mask he wore so easily, laid him bare in front of everyone, and now he was left to deal with the fallout. But despite that rush of power, there was no joy in it, only a hollow emptiness. I exited the restaurant, pushing through the heavy glass door, and stepped into the night air. The cool breeze hit my face, and for a moment, I just stood there, letting it wash over me. My mind raced back to that night, our anniversary, the night everything fell apart. I had come home from a long day of work, excited to surprise Camilla. I'd booked a reservation at her favorite restaurant, bought her, picked up a gift, something personal, something meaningful. I remember standing in the doorway, flowers in hand, a smile on my face, but she wasn't there. Instead, I found an empty house and a cold silence that stretched across every room. At first, I thought maybe she was just running late, maybe she had forgotten to text me. But as the hours passed, the nagging feeling in my gut grew stronger. When I finally got a hold of her, her voice had sounded distant, too casual. She made some excuse about having a last-minute meeting with some friends, something I knew wasn't true from the way she rushed through the words. That was the first time I felt the doubt, the suspicion. But I pushed it aside because I didn't want to believe it, not her, not on our anniversary. The images of that night, of the gold Mercedes parked in front of the house, flooded my mind. I had stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the car that didn't belong, my heart hammering in my chest. I had tried to rationalize it, tell myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew. That hollow feeling grew as I crossed the parking lot, heading toward my car. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I just felt lost. And the confrontation in the restaurant had given me what I wanted, the truth. But now that I had it, I realized it didn't make anything better. When it didn't heal the wounds or undo the betrayal, it just left a gaping hole where my marriage had once been. I stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, looking out at the quiet street. Cars passed by, their headlights sweeping over me, casting long shadows that flickered and danced on the pavement. In that moment, the reality of everything hit me harder than it had before. This wasn't just a moment of anger, a temporary rift. This was the end of everything I had built with Camilla. The memories of our life together started to flood in, unbidden and relentless. The early days of our relationship, when we couldn't get enough of each other. The long nights spent talking, laughing, planning our future. The wedding, the vows we had exchanged. I could still see her in that white dress, smiling up at me with such love in her eyes. And now, that same woman had been wrapped around another man. I leaned against my car, my mind replaying the image of her in bed with Mark, like a cruel, repetitive loop. The intimacy they had shared, the connection that was supposed to be mine, had been given to someone else. And no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, to understand it, there was no escaping the truth. Camilla had chosen to betray me, and she had done it on the night that was supposed to be ours. For a moment, I considered what would come next. What would I do with this anger, this pain? I had confronted Mark, but what about Camilla? I hadn't seen her since that night. We had exchanged words, of course, but nothing real, nothing that mattered. She was still living in the house, the same house that now felt like a tomb, filled with memories that only reminded me of what I had lost. I closed my eyes, letting the cool air calm my nerves. Part of me wanted to drive home, to confront her, to demand an explanation. But another part of me, the part that was tired, so tired, just wanted to leave it all behind, to walk away from the wreckage and never look back. I opened my eyes and looked up at the sky, the stars distant and indifferent. My hands clenched into fists, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of the emptiness around me. I had exposed Mark, but now I had to face the reality of what that meant. The truth was out, but it hadn't set me free. It had only bound me tighter to the pain. As I stood by my car, staring into the empty night, the realization began to sink in. Exposing Mark hadn't given me the closure I thought it would. I had hoped that by confronting him, by making him confess in front of everyone, the weight of Camilla's betrayal would lift, even if only a little. But instead, I felt more burdened than ever. The problem wasn't just Mark, it was the betrayal itself. And no matter how many times I replayed that night in my head, I couldn't escape the crushing truth that my wife, the woman I had devoted myself to for years, had chosen to shatter the life we built together. And now, standing alone in the cold night air, I realized that my confrontation with him was only the beginning. My thoughts turned back to Camilla. I had left her in that house after discovering the truth, after catching her in bed with Mark. It wasn't the argument I expected. I had always imagined that if something like this ever happened, there would be shouting, screaming, maybe even a physical fight. But none of that happened. Instead, there was just a quiet, suffocating emptiness. She had looked at me with wide, guilty eyes, her body tangled in the sheets with his. And I had stood there frozen, unable to process the sight in front of me. I remember her trying to explain, her voice shaking, but I couldn't hear the words. All I could see was the betrayal laid out before me, and it was like a wall came down between us. I had walked out of the room without saying a word, slamming the front door behind me, and I hadn't been back since. Now, days later, that image still haunted me. And despite the rage I felt toward Mark, I knew that it was Camilla I had to confront next. But how? How do you face the person you thought you knew better than anyone else, only to realize they'd become a stranger? I had so many questions. Why did she do it? What drove her to betray me like this on the very night we were supposed to celebrate our love? And was it something I had done or something I hadn't done? I knew that these questions would only lead me down a path of more pain, but I couldn't help myself. I needed answers, even if they tore me apart in the process. I needed to know if our marriage had been a lie, if all those years together had meant nothing to her, or worse, if I had simply been too blind to see it all unraveling in front of me. The memories of our life together felt like cruel reminders now. Every little thing that used to bring me comfort, the way she laughed, the way she would curl up next to me at night, was tainted by the knowledge of what she had done. Even the mundane things, like the way she brewed her coffee in the morning or the way she left her shoes at the front door, now felt like echoes of a life that had been torn from me. I got into the car, gripping the steering wheel tightly as the anger simmered just below the surface. The logical part of my mind told me to let it go, to move on and not allow myself to be consumed by the betrayal. But the emotional part, the one that was raw and bleeding from what she had done, refused to let it rest. I couldn't avoid her forever. Sooner or later, I would have to face Camilla and hear whatever pathetic excuse she had. My chest tightened at the thought of it, the confrontation looming like a dark cloud over me. It wasn't going to be like my confrontation with Mark. No, with her, it would be different. It had to be. She owed me more than just an apology. She owed me an explanation. She owed me the truth. But deep down, I was terrified of what that truth might be. What if she told me she had never loved me? What if she admitted that the affair had been going on for longer than just that one night? The unknown gnawed at me, making it impossible to think clearly. He had started the engine, the sound of it cutting through the silence of the night. I didn't drive, though. Instead, I sat there staring through the windshield at the empty street ahead of me, wondering if I even wanted to go home. Could I face her after everything that had happened? Would I be able to look her in the eye and see the woman I had loved for so many years, or would I only see the stranger who had destroyed my trust? As I sat there, my phone buzzed in the passenger seat. I glanced over, half expecting it to be Camilla, but it wasn't. It was a message from a friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in a while. The message was simple. "You okay?" I stared at the words, my mind whirling. No, I wasn't okay. I was far from okay. But for the first time that night, I realized I didn't have to be okay right now. This wasn't something I could fix in a single confrontation. This wasn't a wound that would heal with a few words. So the only thing I could do was take the next step, even if I didn't know where it would lead. I sat there for a long time, the low hum of the car engine filling the silence around me. The streets outside were quiet, empty, the occasional car passing by in the distance. That message still stared up at me from my phone, the simple words, "You okay?" hanging in the air like a question I didn't know how to answer. No, I wasn't okay. But how could I explain that in a text? How could I condense the storm of emotions inside me into a few words? I thought about ignoring it, about turning off my phone and driving away from it all, but something inside me, maybe the part that didn't want to feel so alone, pushed me to respond. No, not really. I typed back, and for some reason, admitting that out loud felt like the first honest thing I'd said in days. I tossed the phone back onto the passenger seat and leaned back, staring up at the ceiling of the car. My mind was spinning, and I couldn't focus on any one thought for too long before another would come crashing in. Camilla, Mark, the betrayal, the years we had spent together, everything collided into one chaotic mess. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was afraid of what came next. Confronting Mark had been easier in a way. He was the outsider, the villain in my story. But Camilla, she was supposed to be my partner, the woman I had built a life with. How do you even begin to talk to someone who's betrayed you so deeply? I wasn't sure I could handle it. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear her version of events, her reasons, her excuses, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced at the screen. It was my friend responding to my message. "Do you want to talk about it?" I hesitated. Did I? Talking about it out loud made it real, made it something I had to deal with, something I couldn't keep bottled up inside. But wasn't that what I needed? Someone to listen, to help me make sense of it all. I was tired of carrying this weight alone, tired of the silence that followed me everywhere since that night. Maybe talking would help. Or maybe it would just open the floodgates and drown me in emotions I wasn't ready to face. But what other choice did I have? Yeah, I typed, "I think I do." I hit send and felt a small sense of relief, like I had taken the first step towards something, even if I wasn't sure what that something was yet. I sat there, waiting for the reply, and tried to steady my breathing. I knew this conversation was just a distraction from what I really needed to talk to Camilla, but maybe it was the break I needed before facing her. A few minutes passed, and then my phone buzzed again. The message came through, "Come by my place. I'll be up." I stared at the screen, the offer feeling like a lifeline. I hadn't told anyone what had happened. I hadn't spoken a word of it since I walked out of my house that night. To the outside world, everything probably looked normal. No one knew the storm raging inside me. But now, finally, someone did. And maybe that was what I needed, to not be alone in this. I started the car, pulling out of the parking lot, unsure of where I was going, but knowing that wherever it was, it couldn't be worse than where I'd been. As I drove, the memories came flooding back. The first time I met Camilla, the way she laughed at my stupid jokes, the way her eyes sparkled when we talked about the future. The little moments that had made up our life together, now all tainted by the knowledge of what she had done. When I gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling the anger simmer just beneath the surface again. How could she do this to us? To me, every part of me wanted to understand, but I also knew that no explanation would ever be enough. There was nothing she could say that would erase the image of her in bed with Mark, nothing that would fix the betrayal that had torn through our marriage like a knife. I realized then that maybe I wasn't driving to my friend's house just for comfort. Maybe I was going there to prepare myself, to talk through the pain, to clear my head before I went back home. Because sooner or later, I was going to have to confront Camilla. Sooner or later, we were going to have to face each other and deal with what was left of our marriage. But I wasn't ready yet. Not tonight. Tonight, I needed to talk. I needed to let it all out and try to make sense of the mess I was in. Tomorrow, I'd deal with Camilla. I'd find the words, I'd face the truth, and I'd see where that left us. But tonight, I just needed to not feel so alone. The drive to my friend's house felt longer than it should have, even though it was only a few miles away. The streets were nearly empty, the soft glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the road as I made my way through the quiet night. I had expected the drive to calm me, to give me time to think, but instead, my thoughts were more tangled than ever. The events of the past few days replayed in my mind like a broken record, refusing to let me move forward. I hadn't spoken about what had happened, not to anyone. Until now, I hadn't even been able to say the words out loud. My marriage, this thing I had built with Camilla over years of love, trust, and shared memories, had been shattered. And in the silence that followed, I had felt like I was drowning, unable to reach for anything to keep me afloat. The confrontation with Mark had been a desperate attempt to claw my way out of the wreckage, to find some sense of control, but all it had done was leave me feeling emptier than before. When I pulled up in front of my friend's house, the lights were still on, a small beacon of warmth in the darkness. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel as I fought the urge to turn the car around and drive away. I wasn't sure I was ready to do this, to open up and expose the raw wound that had been festering inside me, but I knew I couldn't keep it all bottled up forever. If I didn't let it out, it would destroy me. With a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked up to the door, feeling like I was moving in slow motion. Before I could knock, the door swung open, and there stood Jason, my oldest friend. His face was etched with concern, his eyes scanning me as if he could see the turmoil swirling beneath the surface. "Max," he said softly, stepping aside to let me in, "you look like hell?" I gave a weak smile, more out of habit than anything else. "Yeah, well, I feel like it too." Jason closed the door behind me, and the warmth of his living room wrapped around me, a stark contrast to the cold night air outside. I hadn't realized how much I needed that warmth, that sense of normalcy. For a brief second, it felt like everything might be okay, but then the weight of reality came crashing back down. We sat down on the couch, and Jason handed me a beer without saying a word. That's one of the reasons I had come here. Jason never pushed. He knew when to ask questions and when to just be there, to let me talk at my own pace. And right now, I appreciated the silence, the space he was giving me to gather my thoughts. For a while, we just sat there, the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the background the only sound. I took a long sip of the beer, trying to steady my nerves. Then, finally, I spoke. "Camilla, she cheated on me." The words came out flat, almost emotionless, as if saying them out loud had drained the last bit of feeling from me. I watched Jason's face carefully, waiting for his reaction, but he just nodded, his expression calm, understanding. He didn't say anything, just let the statement hang in the air between us, giving me the space to continue. "It was on our anniversary," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I came home late, and she wasn't alone, so I saw them together. In our bed." Jason's brow furrowed, and I could see the anger flash across his face, but he didn't interrupt. He knew better than to offer empty platitudes or tell me how sorry he was. He just listened, and in that moment, that was all I needed. I left. I continued, my throat tight with the memory. I couldn't stay. I didn't know what to say to her, didn't know how to handle it. So I just walked out. The silence stretched on again, and I could feel Jason waiting, letting me work through the storm in my head. I took another sip of beer, trying to hold back the emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. "I confronted the guy tonight," I said, finally meeting Jason's eyes. "Mark, I found him at a restaurant and made him admit it in front of everyone." Jason's eyes widened slightly at that, but he didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He knew me well enough to understand that this was my way of trying to take control of a situation that had spiraled out of my hands. "Did it help?" he asked quietly. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Not really. It felt good in the moment, seeing him squirm. But now, I just feel empty. Exposing him didn't fix anything. It didn't undo what happened." Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he considered my words. "So, what's next?" "I'm next." That was the question, wasn't it? What was next? I had no idea. My life had been turned upside down, and I didn't know how to put the pieces back together. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do. Jason leaned back, taking a long drink from his beer. Well, whatever you decide, you don't have to do it alone. We'll figure it out. One step at a time. I nodded, grateful for his words, even though they didn't change the reality of the situation. My marriage was broken, and no amount of support could fix that. But for the first time in days, I didn't feel completely lost. I wasn't sure what came next, but at least now I didn't have to face it alone. Jason's words lingered in the air, settling in with the weight of their meaning. It will figure it out. One step at a time. I knew he meant well, but it was hard to see a clear path forward. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into a dark abyss where my future used to be. If the life I had known, the life I had built with Camilla, was in ruins. No matter how hard I tried to hold on to the memories of us, they now felt like lies. And even though Jason's support was a comfort, the reality was that no one could fix this for me. For a few moments, the silence between us stretched again, though it wasn't uncomfortable. Jason was letting me take my time, and I was grateful for it. I stared down at the beer bottle in my hands, absent-mindedly peeling at the label, trying to keep my emotions in check. What do you want to do? Jason asked, finally breaking the quiet. His voice was gentle, but there was a firmness to it, as if he knew that asking the right question might help me unlock something inside myself. I don't know, I admitted again, my voice cracking under the weight of the words. I could hear the exhaustion in it, the frustration. Part of me just wants to disappear, drive somewhere far away, where no one knows me, and just forget all of this. Jason didn't respond right away. I knew he was giving me space to vent, to spill out the thoughts I hadn't dared to say out loud yet. But that's not going to solve anything, is it? I continued, my hands tightening around the bottle. I still have to face her. I still have to deal with the fact that my wife betrayed me. And that's the part one don't know how to handle. Jason nodded, his eyes studying me. You're right. Running won't solve anything. But maybe facing her will give you the closure you need. I looked up at him, feeling the dread creep back in. Closure. That word felt heavy, too heavy. What would closure even look like? A fight? A heart-to-heart conversation where everything was laid bare? Or would it just be the cold, bitter acceptance that things were broken beyond repair? I don't know if I can handle hearing her reasons, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. So what if she tells me it was more than just a mistake? What if she admits she never loved me the way I thought she did? I'm not sure I can deal with that. Jason leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees again, his expression serious. Max, you're already dealing with the worst part of it. You've seen the truth. You know what happened. It's already broken. Now, you just need to hear her side so you can decide what comes next, whether that's moving on, fixing things, or letting go. I stared at him, taking in his words, letting them sink in. He was right. The worst had already happened. I had seen it with my own eyes. Nothing Camilla could say would make it worse than it already was, but maybe hearing her out would help me understand why. Maybe it would give me some sense of control over this chaos. I guess you're right, I finally said, the words coming out quieter than I intended. I can't keep avoiding her. We have to talk. I need to hear it from her, even if it destroys me. Jason nodded, and for a moment we sat in the quiet again, both of us knowing that this was the next step. The confrontation I had been dreading since the night I walked out. The moment where I would have to face Camilla and all the lies she had built our marriage on. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was getting late, and the weight of everything that had happened was finally catching up to me. My body ached with exhaustion, my mind still reeling from the events of the past few days. You want to crash here for the night? Jason asked, noticing the look on my face. I shook my head. No, I think I need to go home. I can't put this off any longer. So Jason didn't argue. He simply nodded, standing up as I got to my feet. You know where to find me if you need anything, he said, his voice steady. Thanks, I said, giving him a small, tired smile. I don't know what I'd do without you, man. He shrugged, smiling back. Hey, that's what friends are for, right? We exchanged a brief hug, the kind of hug between two friends who knew each other better than anyone else. And then I grabbed my jacket. And I hesitated for a second at the door, my hand resting on the doorknob, feeling the weight of what was waiting for me back home. Good luck, Jason said softly behind me, and I gave him a small nod before opening the door and stepping out into the night. The drive back home felt like a journey towards something inevitable. As I got closer to the house, my heart started to race, my thoughts spinning faster and faster. I had no idea what Camilla would say, no idea if I'd find the answers I needed, or if this conversation would only make things worse. But there was no turning back now. This was the moment I had to face the truth, whatever it might be.